Ethan slammed the car door shut, his heart pounding as he approached the house he once called home. His deployment had kept him away for almost a year, but every step closer to the front door filled him with a mix of longing and unease. The lights inside cast a warm glow, and through the window, he could see Sophia moving about, her silhouette a reminder of all the nights he dreamed of holding her again. Yet, something gnawed at him, a whisper of intuition he couldn't shake. The door opened before he could knock. Sophia stood there, her smile soft but distant. Ethan enveloped her in a hug, the intensity of his emotions overwhelming. She returned the gesture, but he felt it, a hesitation, a barrier. He pulled back, searching her eyes for the warmth he remembered. "You been okay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia nodded quickly. "I've missed you so much, Ethan." Her words were right, but her tone didn't match. Ethan forced a smile, letting the moment carry them inside. The house was familiar, yet somehow alien. As they settled into the living room, Sophia perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting nervously. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned forward, his pulse quickening. Was she about to announce the dream they'd talked about? Starting a family? "I'm pregnant," Sophia said, her words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Ethan froze, his mind racing. Joy bubbled up first, and he grabbed her hands, a broad smile spreading across his face. "That's amazing, Sophia. We're going to be parents." But as he spoke, he noticed her expression didn't mirror his excitement. Her eyes darted away, and her shoulders stiffened. Something was wrong. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan threw himself into preparing for fatherhood, reading books and working on the nursery. Sophia joined in, but her smiles never quite reached her eyes. Ethan chalked it up to nerves. After all, they were embarking on a monumental journey. Everything shifted during their first doctor's appointment. The doctor, cheerful and methodical, spoke about the pregnancy's progress. "You're at about 5 weeks along," he said casually. Ethan's breath caught. 5 weeks? His mind raced, calculating the timeline. He'd been gone longer than that. His stomach churned, and a cold dread settled over him. The ride home was silent. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, while Sophia stared out the window. The truth loomed between them, unspoken but undeniable. As they pulled into the driveway, Ethan couldn't contain it anymore. "Sophia," he said, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk." She turned to him, tears brimming in her eyes. "Ethan, please." "Don't," he interrupted, his tone sharper than he intended. "Don't try to dodge this. Just tell me the truth." Sophia broke down, her sobs filling the space between them. "While you were gone, I was lonely, Ethan. I didn't know how to cope." "Who?" His question cut through her tears like a knife. "It was Lucas," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Ethan recoiled as if struck. Lucas, his younger neighbor, barely out of high school. Rage boiled beneath his skin, but he kept it contained, his military discipline kicking in. He got out of the car without another word, needing air, space, anything to process this betrayal. In the days that followed, Ethan's world unraveled. Sophia's confession haunted him, the image of her with Lucas an unrelenting torment. He confronted Lucas, whose cowardly apologies only deepened Ethan's fury. But Ethan didn't lash out. Not yet. He started planning. Ethan wasn't a man to act on impulse. His revenge had to be calculated, precise, and devastating. He began gathering information, Lucas's habits, weaknesses, and aspirations. Meanwhile, he maintained a facade of calm around Sophia, though their relationship was now a hollow shell. The night of reckoning arrived. Ethan orchestrated a confrontation that neither Sophia nor Lucas would forget. Lucas's dreams of escaping their small town were destroyed when Ethan exposed his actions publicly, ensuring his reputation was in shreds. But that wasn't enough. Ethan's final act of revenge was directed at Sophia. With meticulous care, he uncovered financial discrepancies and secret messages she'd exchanged with Lucas. Armed with evidence, he filed for divorce and secured his assets, leaving Sophia with nothing but the fallout of her choices. As Ethan walked away from the life he once cherished, he felt a strange sense of relief. The betrayal had shattered him, but it had also forged a new resolve. He wasn't the same man who had left for deployment. This Ethan was sharper, stronger, and ready to rebuild, this time on his own terms. Ethan left the house with a packed bag slung over his shoulder, stepping into the crisp night air. He didn't glance back, not at the home they had built together, not at the woman who had shared his life, now tainted with betrayal. He didn't need to. The ties that once bound him to that place had been severed, leaving only a hollow ache in their wake. The first few weeks were brutal. Ethan moved into a small apartment across town, far enough to avoid running into Sophia or anyone connected to her. His days were consumed by work. His military training made him a natural at precision tasks, and he took a temporary job that demanded long hours. At night, though, the silence crept in. The betrayal played on an endless loop in his mind. Sophia's tearful confession, Lucas's stammered apologies, the sickening realization of how deeply he'd been deceived. But Ethan wasn't a man to wallow in despair. He was a fighter, and his survival instinct soon kicked in. He threw himself into rebuilding his life with the same discipline that had carried him through battles abroad. He started running every morning, letting the burn in his muscles drown out the turmoil in his heart. He joined a local boxing gym, finding solace in the rhythmic thud of his gloves against the bag. Still, the anger simmered beneath the surface. Revenge had been a release, but it hadn't erased the betrayal. And as Ethan pieced his life back together, he found himself grappling with deeper questions. Why had Sophia done it? Was it truly loneliness that drove her into Lucas's arms? Or was there something broken in their relationship long before he'd left? One evening, while scrolling through old messages on his phone, Ethan stumbled upon a text from his best friend, Marco. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Marco moved to the city to pursue his career. On a whim, Ethan called him. "Ethan?" Marco's voice was a mix of surprise and warmth. "Man, it's been forever. How are you?" For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a spark of genuine connection. They talked for hours, catching up on everything from work to Marco's fledgling restaurant business. When Ethan finally hung up, he felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had shifted. It wasn't long before Marco invited him to visit. A weekend in the city sounded like exactly what Ethan needed. A chance to escape the memories haunting him and see life through a fresh lens. The city was a whirlwind. Marco's restaurant was a bustling hub of energy, and Ethan found himself drawn into the lively atmosphere. He helped out in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and plating dishes with the same meticulous attention to detail he applied to everything. It was exhausting, but for the first time in months, his mind was clear. And then there was Camille. Camille was one of Marco's close friends, a sharp-witted journalist with a contagious laugh and a spark in her eyes that intrigued Ethan. They met one evening over drinks at Marco's apartment, and the connection was immediate. "So, Ethan," she asked, leaning forward with a curious smile, "what brings you to the city?" He hesitated for a moment, debating how much to reveal. "Needed a change of scenery," he said finally, keeping it vague. Camille didn't press him, but her knowing look told him she understood more than he let on. Over the next few days, they saw each other often, sharing stories and laughter. For the first time since Sophia's betrayal, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Hope that life could move forward, that there might still be something worth fighting for. But just as Ethan began to open himself up to this new chapter, the past came crashing back. One afternoon, while walking through a crowded market with Marco and Camille, Ethan spotted a familiar face. Sophia. She was with Lucas, her hand tucked casually into his. The sight hit Ethan like a sucker punch, stealing the air from his lungs. He stopped in his tracks, his mind racing. What was she doing here? Had she followed him, or was this just a cruel coincidence? Camille noticed his sudden stillness and followed his gaze. "Do you know her?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched. "That's her." Understanding dawned in Camille's eyes, and she placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Do you want to leave?" For a moment, Ethan considered it. But then he shook his head, a new determination settling over him. "No," he said firmly. I'm done running. What Ethan didn't realize was that this encounter would set off a chain of events more tangled and dangerous than he could have imagined. As Sophia and Lucas unwittingly crossed paths with Ethan's new life, old wounds were reopened, secrets emerged, and Ethan's quest for closure would take him down a path darker than he ever anticipated. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about power, redemption, and reclaiming the parts of himself he thought he'd lost forever. Ethan watched Sophia and Lucas disappear into the crowd, his emotions swirling, a mix of anger, disgust, and a strange sense of relief. Seeing them together confirmed what he already knew. They belonged to a life he no longer wanted. But something else flickered deep within him, a spark of curiosity. Why were they here? What did they want? Marco and Camille exchanged concerned glances as Ethan silently turned on his heel and started walking, his shoulders tense. They didn't press him, instead keeping pace, offering quiet companionship as they left the market behind. That evening, Ethan sat alone in Marco's apartment, staring out at the city lights. The sight of Sophia had stirred something in him, something he wasn't ready to name. He didn't want revenge anymore, at least not the petty, immediate kind. No, if Sophia and Lucas had shown up in his world again, it wasn't by chance. There was a reason, and he intended to find it. The next morning, Ethan began digging. It started small, online searches, whispers to mutual acquaintances, but soon he pieced together enough to paint a picture. Sophia had followed Lucas to the city after their small-town scandal made it impossible for them to stay. She was struggling, juggling part-time work while Lucas floundered in his pursuit of a glamorous but unrealistic career in the arts. Ethan smirked bitterly at the irony. They had destroyed his life for a dream they couldn't even sustain. As he dug deeper, he discovered something even more unsettling. Lucas had a history of manipulation, small-time scams, lies that grew into bigger schemes. And Sophia? She seemed to be caught in his web, enabling his antics, perhaps out of guilt or desperation. Ethan didn't pity her. Not yet. But the knowledge gave him an edge, and he wasn't going to waste it. He began crafting a plan, not out of spite, but out of principle. Lucas needed to face consequences for his actions, and Sophia? She needed to confront the reality of what she'd chosen. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. Ethan enlisted Camille's help, carefully explaining the situation. She was skeptical at first, but eventually agreed, intrigued by the opportunity to expose a liar and thief. Her skills as a journalist proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered the full extent of Lucas's schemes, unpaid debts, fake contracts, and a growing trail of people he'd deceived. It wasn't long before Ethan's plan began to take shape. The first step was subtle. Ethan orchestrated a series of anonymous tips to the authorities, ensuring that Lucas's shady dealings caught their attention. Then, using his connections through Marco and Camille, he quietly informed the local art community about Lucas's reputation. Opportunities dried up, and Lucas found himself increasingly cornered. But Ethan wasn't done. The final act of his plan came during an upscale art event that Lucas and Sophia had somehow managed to crash. Ethan and Camille attended as well, blending seamlessly into the crowd. At just the right moment, Camille stepped forward, armed with damning evidence of Lucas's fraud. She didn't make a scene. Instead, she approached the gallery owner discreetly, handing over a folder of documents that exposed Lucas's lies. The fallout was swift. Lucas was confronted publicly, his protests drowned out by the weight of proof against him. As the crowd turned on him, Sophia stood frozen, her face pale as she realized the extent of what had been uncovered. Ethan watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. He didn't gloat, didn't revel in the chaos unfolding before him. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Lucas to face the consequences of his actions and Sophia to grapple with the choices that had brought her here. In the days that followed, Ethan felt a strange sense of closure. He had confronted the demons of his past, not with violence or anger, but with calculated resolve. It wasn't about Sophia or Lucas anymore. It was about reclaiming his life and proving, to himself most of all, that he could rise above the pain. And as he stood on Marco's rooftop one evening, Camille by his side, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. You did it, Camille said softly, her gaze steady. Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. I did. But more importantly, I'm finally free. With the city lights stretching out before him, Ethan knew his journey wasn't over. But for the first time, he was ready to move forward, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a man determined to build a life worth living.